Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, back with another Dark Shadows video for you guys and gals. I am here to give my review and retrospective of episode 6 of Dark Shadows from the beginning. Uh, Narrated by Alexander Mulkey Isles, written by Art Wallace, directed by Leila Swift. So, you notice that you see this, you see the house, you see the backdrop of Sea View, you get Alexander's Victoria's introduction, her voiceover, and she's down in the basement and she's looking for David. And I love how, look, the black and white episodes of Dark Shadows really bring out the gothic feel of the mansion. It's big, it's spooky, it's every room is creepy, and basements are supposed to be especially creepy. I love the set design of the basement, really, really well done. I love how the steps come down. Um, So she's down in the basement looking for David, and she sees this door, and it's the only other door other than the one she came in, and that's in the basement. So she tries it, and it's locked. She hears the sound of footsteps, and she turns around and she sees this man standing on the staircase looking at her. He has a fire poker, and she's, who are you? This is where you get the opening credits. This is something you're going to see a lot of in Dark Shadows. And what I mean by that is you'll always get a bit of an opening with DS and then the theme. Um, that's just how the show was. I mean, so we go back to the basement, and Victoria goes from asking the questions to getting asked questions herself. Man holding the fire poker says, "Who are you and what are you doing down here?" And really, she tries to answer, but he just asked another. I think he asked only one question, then he asked another. Um, and then she's like, "Well, I wasn't stupid." He grabbed the man with the fire poker grabs Victoria by the wrist, and he's squeezing pretty hard, and he's got the fire poker. He looks like he's gonna hit her with it, and then that's when you hear Elizabeth say Matthew. So this, the man Matthew lets her go, and this is where we are getting the character introduction of Matthew Morgan. You heard in the second episode that one person does the heavy work around the house. Matthew Morgan is that one person. He's the only servant that is part of the house. He's the groundskeeper, really. Really. It almost like I'm going to say Willie. No, really. Um, so, Willie Loomis. We all think about him. So, excuse me. So, Elizabeth is talking to Matthew Morgan. She asks Matthew, "What is he doing?" Victoria is very hysterical a bit here, and it's no wonder. And Elizabeth's just like, "Okay, let me talk to him." And trying to, and he goes, "Well, I heard a noise down in the basement. I come to see where is it." And there she was by the door, where she didn't belong, you know, trying to get in. And Elizabeth says, "Well, is this true?" to Victoria, and she goes, "Well, I wasn't trying to get. I thought David might be down here. That's why I was down here. I thought David was down here, and I heard a noise down here, and I thought David was down here." So Vicky also heard a noise, and she thought David was down here. And Liz does ask her, "Well, why down here?" And she goes, "Well, I searched everywhere else." And when now I want to be clear, when she says she searched everywhere else, she searched like the kitchen, the drawing room, Roger's study, The bedrooms, she didn't. The west wing is sealed off. Part of the east wing is sealed off. Again, they don't have all the house opened up exactly. They can get. I'm not saying they can't get into those parts of the houses, but but to her, she's only going to search so many areas that are available to her. And this was the last place from inside the house that she searched. I don't think she searched outside the house because that would take forever, take up the rest of her day. So she tries the basement. She figures, okay, this is the next logical place I have to search. And you could sort of tell that with Vicky here in this dialogue, that she's telling the truth. So she said she heard a noise that she come down to see if David was down there. Could she search everywhere else? And Liz says to Victoria that she doesn't think David will come down here to try David's room again. And after that, go wait for Elizabeth in the drawing room. And Elizabeth just tells Matthew that Victoria is working, uh, here. Um, so Matthew goes upstairs too, and Liz goes over to check the door that Victoria was trying. Um, it is still locked, and she's gonna unlock it, and you hear this strange creaking sound. Liz, walks around all this junk, and what does she see sitting in like this empty wooden box? She sees David sitting in an empty wooden box. Um, David Hennessy's character, David Collins. So here's David hiding from Vicky, and basically you get a good bit here. First of all, you get a bit about David's mother, and we haven't heard too much about her. We've heard that Victoria assumed she was dead, but Carolyn says no, she's not dead. She's just ill. And by all implications I get from characters is that she's mentally ill, or she's not physically ill. That's just in it because there seems to be, and the reason I say it is because of how David acts too. Um, you know, with with this, we get that David's mother was was sick. She's not well, and that's why she can't come back until she gets well. Until the doctors give her the okay. So, but David has it in his mind that as long as Vicky's here, his mother won't come back because Vicky wants to keep um, David away from his mother. And what Elizabeth tells, this is where we, the audience, find out that Liz knows more than what she's saying about Victoria here a bit. And it's thanks to David that we get it. Um, Liz tells David that Victoria would never want any child to be away from their mother and father. And you know why? Because she knows what it's like to not have a mother and father, to not know, to be away from them, not know who they are. She was raised in an orphanage. She had a very lonely childhood. And David asked her, "How do you know that?" And Liz just says, "I just do." Um, you also learn in this episode how conniving David can really be in manipulation. We know Roger tries to manipulate, but he's not as good as his son is. Um, his son is trying to manipulate Liz. Oh, Matthew's right. She was trying to get into the room. She's trying to spy on us and spy. She wants to know our secrets. And now Liz does not believe that, obviously, but she also knows that she knows what she said to Vicky herself, that David is a very troubled young boy, and she sees a lot of that trouble in him. This is an episode here too that if David's initial introduction did not convince you that he needed some sort of help, you could say he's just being an adolescent kid and telling Vicky to leave, breaking into her room, being being a brat. This here is sort of the episode I would say is proof that David definitely needs, some in-home attention or care or tutorage because, and this is what Liz is talking about. Well, here's this kid who's, seeing a lot of stuff between his mom and dad, and he knows how to be manipulative toward adults. He's learned that very quickly, and he uses it to his advantage, or tries to at least. And this is what Liz is meaning, that hey, you need to learn educational stuff, not how to be manipulative. And this emotional attachment to your mother is something she does appreciate, but it's also become such a distraction for David that you can see how he's easily, like, I don't know, like say dark side, but swayed, that he wants to manipulate other people just to drive somebody away, is what I'm trying to get at. He again, this episode does a lot with very, very little, and that's something Dark Shadows is very much used to. And it's something you got to get used to. Yes, you have to pick up on the little tiny conversations that each character having, because this is why I say you can't really leave. You can't ever leave the room when Dark Shadows is on, because you sort of miss conversations that are important. You might not think they are on the grand scheme of things, but they somewhat are. And this is just another one of those important conversations that happen, that you're sort of learning something about a bunch of characters. Laura, David, Liz to a degree, because she goes, "Oh, poor Dave," and she hugs his head. Again, she doesn't believe him. She just feels sorry for him. And in the upstairs in the drawing room, you see Matthew Morgan cleaning out the fireplace. Vicky has her back turned to him, and he's like, "Morgan, Matthew Morgan." She's like, "Winters, Victoria Winters." So we get our James Bond sort of introduction to the characters, which is hilarious. And Vicky and Matthew have a very interesting conversation. That Vicky is talking to Matthew about Paul Stoddard. He is, "Well, why would you be interested in him?" And she tries to say, about 18 years ago, she goes, "You wouldn't want to hurt Mrs. Stoddard, would you?" And, because he would not want anyone to hurt Liz. And she goes, "I think Mrs. Stoddard's a nice lady." And he goes, "Come here, I want to show you something." And they go over to the drawing room window, and Matthew opens it. He points back, he goes, "Back beyond there's woods, there's trees, is my house, and she gave it to me." She said, "As long as I work here, it's mine." She goes, he goes, "You know what I was doing before this? Scrubbing the floors of the cannery. I was in there and all that stank." And the day what we do learn from Matthew Morgan is very interesting, is that the day Paul Stoddard left, Liz fired the chauffeur. She fired the cook. As Matthew puts it, Liz fired all the servants. And this is the first time you hear the word servants in DS history, by the way, is this episode. So you do get that there were servants for Liz, that she had a chauffeur, a cook, a lot of maids, but they all got fired when Paul left. And that was to hear that from Matthew. It's You get why you don't hear it from Roger, because Roger doesn't really want to say much about the family to Elizabeth. It has always shocked me that we get this from Matthew and not Liz. I'm not saying it's wrong. Don't get me wrong. I love that we get it from a different character, because what we're really getting is, we're getting the truth, but we're also getting somebody who wasn't completely there 18 years ago. He knows what Elizabeth told him the night she hired him, when she hired Matthew Morgan, that, hey, Paul Starter left. I'm firing these people. These people are all, I'm firing them. And he was there for the firing, but he was not there when Paul actually left. Now, people are going to call continuity error because it's Matthew who gets rid of the rug. Liz could have fired the servants the night Paul was supposedly killed. That's something I'll get into when I get into that episode. Um, Now, with this, you, you know, Matthew tells Victoria, he goes, I do the heavy work, I tend to the gardens, and I mind my business. And I hope you can do the same. Um, Ominous warnings from Matthew Morgan, page 1, 2, and 3. No, I really interesting character for sure. So Carolyn comes in and she's talking to Victoria. By the way, this episode takes place the same day as the episode where they're in the kitchen the morning Carolyn tells Roger Vicky's sore at him. So this is that same day. And I'll get into why I say that. It's sort of going to get more of a reveal in the next episode than this episode, more so this episode. This episode, you could say, we're not sure. The next episode more confirms it than this one. I will say that much. Because you only get verbiage in this episode. And by verbiage, I mean conversation between characters you know happened, but they're sort of rehashing the conversations to a degree, but not the same exact way. Carolyn told Vicky in the previous episode, hey, 18 years ago, my dad left, and then those letters started coming, maybe there's a connection. And, she asked if Carolyn, Carolyn asked Vicky, and she asked her mother about it, and she goes, about what? She goes, about what? She says, about what we talked about. And she doesn't say yesterday. She just says what we talked about. That's sort of your hint that it's still the same day. That's your verbiage hint. Um, there's going to be visual hints. I promise. Just not in this episode. So you get the fact that Vicky says no. She goes, what's the sense of me giving ideas if you're not going to run with him? And Vicky says she's nervous. She goes, there's nothing to be nervous about. Just said, oh, Miss Stoddard. Paul Stoddard left. And letters started coming to the family home 18 years ago. Is there any connection? And Carolyn is to her, it's a simple. But again, this is what, when somebody who differs of growing up in a kooky gothic old house for, 18 years and somebody who goddamn hasn't. You gotta really love the character differences between Carolyn and Vicky. It's like Carolyn, she'll just say anything, and she won't give a shit about the consequences of it. And Vicky, she's worried about those consequences to a degree, but not fully. I don't think she's worried about so much. I shouldn't say consequence. She's not trying to make anybody mad. She's not trying to deliberately step on toes, but she also doesn't want lied to. She's trying to give them their respect without really knowing them, and she hopes they'll do the same for her. I think Vicky believes in people and has faith in them. Um, but again, it's a really interesting character, Vicky. So, and you can sort of tell that now in this episode, she sort of does step on some toes here because the conversation between her and Liz is really interesting. Now, Carolyn, uh, the phone rings and Liz walks in. She gets it. She goes, "Oh, Carolyn, you know, telephone," and Liz answers it and she says, "It's Joe," and she says, "Take it in the hall," and that's Carolyn's cue to leave. Carolyn goes into the hall. Liz waits for her to pick up, hands up the phone, and shuts the drawing room doors and begins talking to Vicky. And she goes, "David's scared of you. And Vicky says, "Well, there's no reason for him to fear him." And Liz is right on this when she says this. There is in his mind, and that's what Liz sees. Liz is meaning, Liz has seen David enough to know that in David's mind is fractured. This is what I mean by Liz's reasonings for bringing Vicky, whether it was Vicky or anyone else, was important to her. That wasn't the only reason, no, but it is one of them. You can't completely ignore a Tudor, whether it was going to be Victoria Winters, and I'm not saying it wasn't, but I'm just more using the hypothesis. Yes, David Collins really did need a tutor, friend, and companion. Um, and Liz saw that. And, you know, Liz says that David's very attached to his mother. And that's where Victoria starts breaking into the conversation of her, you know, about, what does Miss Stoddard know about her past. She goes, so much happened here 18 years ago. I received letters, up until this, is there any connection? And Elizabeth says, yeah, a lot did happen here 18 years ago, a great deal, but that has nothing to do with you. You were recommended to my brother. Someone from the Fallon home recommended you to my brother. They said you were great with children. Well, I'd like to send a letter of thanks. Could I? And she goes, no. And she goes, why? Because there's no such person. And it's like, oh, but you sort of understand Vicky's frustration. It's like, what's the big deal of letting me know? It's not like I'm going to do them any harm. Roger does a better, I will say this. Lewis Edmonds' Roger Collins does a better save job than what Liz just did here. Liz is more defensive of Vicky's accusation, of Vicky's interrogation. I mean, I can't blame Liz, but I can't blame Victoria either, because Liz is full of shit on this one. So and so Liz goes, I don't like be interrogated. She goes, I'm sorry, that was rude. And then after the conversation ends, after the apologies land, pretty smoothly, Vicky wants to make a phone call. She goes to pick up the one phone. Carolyn's off it, but then the drawing room doors open again, and in walks Carolyn and Elizabeth, and they're talking about how Joe's gonna come up, and Vicky goes up to get her coat. She's going in. She goes, I'm gonna go into town. She goes, you know, and she goes. Carolyn says, well, you have to. It's an hour down, and it's a half hour for the bus. You'd have to wait. And when Vicky comes back down, Carolyn just hands her the keys to the car because Joe's coming up to the house. Um, Joe's got some big news to tell Carolyn. Just not in this episode. And Vicky leaves the house, and when she does, Miss Stoddard walks out. She goes, "What was that?" She goes, and Carolyn teases her mother. "Oh, this is one of our ghosts rattling around, Mom." Oh my God! There's the expression of the word ghost again, and there is Dark Shadows does tend to use ghosts as more of a metaphor at times. They're not always talking about a literal spirit or specter. They're talking about the living, breathing, you know, people who live at Collinwood, but who could have a link to the Collins family, like a Victoria, like a Burke Devlin. No, Burke's not a Collins, but he has a link to the Collins family. He has history with Roger. Um, and then there's Victoria Winters. So, uh, and that's the end of this episode, by the way. That's where it ends. Is Vicky leaves and she goes into town. And again, this when she goes into town, that's where we see the next episode. The next episode, like I said, in the first, when you look at the episodes of Dark Shadows, it's not there's no time jump yet. There's no it feels like I've been here for so long, and I'm not sure how long it's actually been. We're not getting that yet. We're still getting, okay, this happened this night, this happened that same night, this happened the same day as the morning of this. And so Dark Shadows is still going on a date like a normal time so far. Um, that's what I'll say to that. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. I don't believe I did. So I'll say this: that one of the most interesting, fascinations of this episode I talked about briefly is, it's Matthew pointing out the servants being fired. Why Matthew, why not Liz? I think it just made sense to have Matthew do that because you don't want to put all your eggs in the Mrs. Stoddard basket, or the Roger basket. So why not have a brand new character who you're introducing for the first time in Matthew Morgan explain it, because it gives him a little something. It might not give him much, but it gives him something. And I like the fact that Art Wallace and the writers did that. Very, very good job. Um, Again, I enjoy these episodes. I hope you guys enjoy the reviews. Episode 6 review. Guys, you guys have a good night. Take care.